Zero week. This webinar is on transforming our energy system for net zero. I'm Rob Saunders and I run a programme called Prospering from the Energy Revolution, which is part of UKRI's delivery of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And I'll tell you more about that later. It's all about the benefits of local smart energy approaches. I'm really pleased to be joined today as well by David Richardson. David is Head of Innovation for the Strategic Innovation Fund. David, do you want to just introduce yourself and give a brief overview of your role?
Good morning, everybody. As Rob said, my name's David Richardson. I'm Head of Innovation for the Ofgem Strategic Innovation Fund, which is a 5-year programme really looking at how we transform our gas and electricity networks within the UK to achieve net zero and also create business opportunities for the UK.
Great, thanks. And you'll be hearing from both of us in more detail about those programmes coming up. What we're going to be talking about is, as the session says, how do we get to net zero in our energy systems? And this isn't just about some of the big headline technologies that we tend to hear about a lot more in the news, you know, modular nuclear, hydrogen, offshore wind, which all tend to be on the supply side of our energy system. This is about how we make the whole system work better. And some of these less profile areas, what we do with our energy networks to make them capable of delivering net zero for the consumer over the coming decade, how we integrate the whole thing, how we put it all together intelligently and make the whole work to really deliver what the consumer needs in the future. So we're going to be looking at how do we integrate supply, demand, and the transmission and distribution of our energy system this morning, and how our government, industry, and indeed many of our other stakeholders working together to try and get us on that journey in the most productive way possible. We've got just over an hour until 11:15. So we're going to hear presentations on both of those programmes. We really have a strong desire to take as many questions from you as we possibly can. So we've left a good slot for questions at the end. And to register your questions, please can you put those in the Q&A function. The chat is good for general comments and general observations about the things that are being said. But if you want a question to be addressed by one of us, please put it in the Q&A. Great. We'll try and deal with most of those at the end, rather than trying to deal with them as they come. So be patient with us and we'll get to them. So first up, we're going to hear from David on the Strategic Innovation Fund and how that is delivering for net zero. I'm going to just stop sharing this slide and let David share his presentation. Over to you, David. Sorry, David, you're on mute.
Thanks, Rob. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm just going to talk you through the Strategic Innovation Fund programme. I've got a few videos in here, which some of them were coming through a little bit quietly when we were testing this morning, but they do have subtitles, so I'll let them run and share the links with everyone in the chat so that you can view them afterwards if they don't come through as clearly as we would like.
The Strategic Innovation Fund is investing £450 million in energy network innovation because the challenge of rapidly decarbonising our energy networks is enormous. But we can do this. With collaboration, we can make the leap, a giant leap together. We need the bravest, brightest, boldest change makers from across the world. to work with Innovate UK, Ofgem and the Strategic Innovation Fund to create the energy networks of the future. The best ideas targeted at the most pressing challenges that reduce emissions and save consumers money. Join us now. Take a giant leap together with the Strategic Innovation Fund at ofgem.gov.uk.
So that's the first introduction to the Strategic Innovation Fund programme. And really, it's an important partnership between Ofgem, who are the UK's energy regulator, and Innovate UK, which is part of UKRI. Ofgem's objectives really are to protect energy consumers whilst delivering a greener, fairer energy system through the energy transition. Whilst Innovate UK are really focused on how do we achieve business growth in priority sectors. We work across all areas of the economy, and we target business growth and economic opportunity, but we're also looking for societal benefits and how businesses can support those societal benefits. And through this partnership, we're delivering the Strategic Innovation Fund to transform how our energy networks operate, both gas and electricity, and how we can achieve the best net zero for consumers over the coming years. We've got two core aims through the programme. The first one is to deliver this net zero energy system at the lowest cost to consumers, and how we can bring the best value to all the people that pay energy bills across GB and the UK. And the second one is to position the UK as what we term the Silicon Valley of energy systems. By that, what we really mean is how do we make the UK the best place in the world to test, trial, and demonstrate energy technologies, and then further grow those and start exporting around the world as well. Beneath these two objectives, there are four broad areas that we're looking to achieve benefits in. The first one is to reduce the cost of energy for consumers, and never has that been more important than now. The second is to achieve the carbon reductions in the energy system that we need to achieve net zero. The third is to improve access to revenues and markets. The energy networks are responsible for a huge amount of market funding through the UK, and we want to make that accessible to generators, the type of organisations that can support the grid and prevent blackouts and things. But we also want to see new products and services brought into the market, which we've never seen before in the UK. We structure the whole programme around these three core pillars, and these are really important for how we can respond to the challenge as things crop up over the years, and we can also pivot to support both government and Ofgem's objectives. The middle pillar is really the core of the entire programme. This is our agile challenges. We operate a funding programme where we design challenges and set them on an annual basis. And the first set of challenges were launched last year. Those were whole system integration, heat, data and digital, and zero emission transport. And we then scale up through three phases. The first being discovery, where we award around £150,000 to 3-month projects. Those projects then get the opportunity to do their first prototyping of their solutions in something that we call the alpha phase, where they can receive up to 500,000 of funding through the Strategic Innovation Fund. And then finally, they move on to the beta projects, which are multi-year, multi-million or tens of £1 million projects. And these are really large-scale, nationally significant projects, which will change the way that our energy system operates in the future. And that structure is really important to us because it allows us to have a fail-fast approach. It allows us to maneuver projects over the years that they are running. And by the time we get to beta, we know that we've really got the best projects in the UK to achieve the outcomes we're looking for. The column on the left, the strategic alignment, is really about how we better work across government, other parts of UKRI, so that they can understand the learnings and findings of these projects, and we can enable responsive policy and regulatory change. But the other column on the right, the commercialization, is just as important. This is really to ensure that we've got procurement frameworks set up, that we've got relationships with investors and financial institutions so that we can start rolling these projects out as quickly as possible and start achieving that impact upon completion. So I'd just like to take a quick step back now and talk about what the UK energy system looks like. Many people are quite familiar with generation. A lot of people know that wind and solar and hydrogen are likely to make up a significant part of our energy system in future. And increasingly, the general public and energy consumers are being aware of the new technologies that are going to be needed to achieve net zero in the home, things like electric vehicles, heat pumps, different forms of low carbon gases. But what they might be less familiar with is the part in the middle. And these are really the pipes and wires, the pylons, both at the transmission and distribution level. So that means the large scale and more local level that move these things around. And really these parts of the system are a bit of the missing jigsaw, but are crucial to enabling us to connect the generation sources to the demand sources. We've got a number of regulated monopolies that operate the gas and electricity systems in the UK. So there's, these are the geographic regions that those operate on. On the left are the gas distribution networks, which are the more local. And on the right is the transmission network, which is operated by a single organization, National Grid. This picture below is at one of the stations where you'll see compression of gases around the country. But a lot of the time, this infrastructure is below the ground. So many people might not think that there's a huge bit of infrastructure that delivers these gases to homes and businesses around the country. So moving on to an example of one of the first projects that we funded through the CIF. As I say, this might be a bit quiet, but we do have subtitles, and I'll share the links.
Before the gas networks can repurpose any pipelines for hydrogen use, detailed integrity assessments will be required to determine their suitability and to identify any remedial actions that must be performed. In particular, there is a requirement to have improved understanding of its pipeline assets, as the introduction of hydrogen presents different challenges than today.
Our solution will focus firstly on identifying the necessary data set which will be needed to assess integrity. Secondly, how we obtain the necessary data sets using novel inline inspection techniques. And finally, how do we provide the recorded data to the gas networks in a digital format?
The proposed project can help to safely repurpose existing pipelines, indirectly creating major savings by avoiding the design and construction of significant distances, new pipelines, and reduce our environmental footprint. In addition, the project will provide a critical input to the development of a long-term integrity management plan for hydrogen transportation, leading to increased security of supply for customers.
So that was one of our gas-focused projects, but we've also got a collection of projects which are focused on the electrical system as well. Just skip on. And the electricity system, in a similar way, is split into two categories. The first is the electricity transmission, which is the high voltage system. These are the bigger cables, which carry larger volumes of electricity around the country, and the electricity distribution system, which are the more local networks. And these connect up throughout the UK. We've got 4 electricity transmission companies and also the electricity system operator, who are responsible for all the intelligent management of the system and deciding when things must turn on and off from a generation point of view. The electricity distribution companies are those that bring electricity into local businesses and your homes. And those are the sort of organizations that you might see doing works around occasionally, or in fact, working with you in the house. And here's an example of one of the projects that was funded through the CIF last year, focused on the electricity system.
The transition to net zero emissions is changing the sources of electricity used to power our homes and businesses, with a shift from traditional steady synchronous fossil fuel generation to variable renewable electricity generation. This presents grid balancing and grid stability challenges, which need to be addressed as we move towards a decarbonised power system. Project Incentive will explore the role that short-term energy storage at the point of grid connection of offshore wind farms, supported by suitable voltage and power control systems, can play in stabilising the grid. It will do so by demonstrating innovative control approaches which combine technologies to get more out of them together than you'd get from them acting independently. This will support the acceleration of decarbonisation efforts, keep costs down for consumers, and demonstrate the role of renewable generation in providing balancing and stability services to the grid.
And as you saw from that project, we have a range of different organizations that are involved in the CIF projects, but they do need to be led by an energy network company, either gas or electricity. It's really important that we do bring in those outside ideas, and the really innovative businesses are able to give an opportunity to contribute to this project as well. Quickly to touch on our round 2 challenges. These were launched about a month ago, and we'll be seeking applications for them between September and November this year. We're currently going through a process of looking for people with the best ideas that we can work with to build partnerships with the energy networks to deliver some of these. The first challenge is around supporting a just energy transition. And this means that everybody has equal access to the new technologies that will improve their energy usage across the UK, that we ensure that some demographics aren't left behind because they're disadvantaged, and also that we've got solutions which cater for everyone, whether you live in an urban environment, a rural environment, or any other sort of place. The second challenge is really geared around the UK government's target to achieve a fully net zero electricity system by 2035. That's going to need some really radical changes in how we operate and manage our system. Currently, we use a lot of gas peaker plants to provide the sort of headroom for the most peak demand periods on our grid. And we're going to have to learn how to do that with much more novel renewable sources in future. The third challenge is around improving energy system resilience and robustness. And this touches on the full range of those elements. Some of it is how do we get our gas and power systems up and running and delivering services again after extreme weather events like the storms we saw last year. The other side of it is how do we ensure that supply chains are resilient? And we've seen some of these supply chain shocks around the world this last year, which we need to ensure that our energy systems are resilient to in the future. The final challenge is around accelerating decarbonisation of major energy demands. And principally what we're looking at within that is heat, transport, and energy efficiency. And how can the energy network support the accelerated decarbonisation of those things, both on a national and local scale? If you are interested in any of these challenges, then please visit the link below, which gives more details on the requirements for all of them. Before I finish, I just wanted to touch on what we see as some of the really important aspects of delivering an energy innovation program on a national scale. The first one is that regulatory change is essential. We're really accelerating the pace of technical development through these programs. And if we're going to achieve net zero, we need our policy and regulation to be responsive to the new technologies and processes that are coming through. So we're trying to build mechanisms where we can extract data from the projects as quickly as possible, put it in front of the people that need to consider that evidence, and have a feedback loop where we can iteratively test results as well. The second point is around communications and outreach. We need to really disseminate the findings of these far and wide so that the projects can be replicated by others and scaled very quickly. I've already touched on the importance of data for the regulatory process, but we also really want to start being far more intelligent with how we use data. That means publishing things in a machine readable format, making data open wherever possible, and really facilitating the digitalization of our energy system, which both myself and Rob believe is going to be a key enabler to us achieving net zero. Finance and investment is crucial. We need to make all our propositions financeable, and that means working with institutions like the Green Finance Institution and the National Infrastructure Bank to start looking at how we finance these things at scale and not just on a piecemeal project by project basis. Our agile process is really important, and we take a goal-orientated innovation approach with each of our challenges. It's also really important that we work with other government departments like the Department for Energy and Industrial Strategy, but also areas like MHCLG and culture, etc., which might be responsible for some of the other infrastructure types like water and telecoms. We think it's really important that these things are looked at in the whole rather than in the isolation of the energy system. The final part is about us building public and private partnerships. We've started working with some international incubators and accelerator programs who are already working to support small startups to become the best companies that they can be. We're working with an organization called Free Electrons who operate in Ireland and across Europe. InnoEnergy, which is a network of European utilities, so we can learn and start exporting our ideas through to Europe as well. And also UKRI in the States, who perform a similar role over there. The Energy Innovation Summit is one of our landmark events, and actually this year it's going to be the first Energy Innovation Summit happening in Glasgow in September. This is where we're bringing together all the energy networks, but also the wider energy system community. So we're looking to have the involvement of retail suppliers, a host of our programs across UKRI, including some of Rob's work, which he'll touch on, but also how we look at construction and buildings. And really we want to bring this as being the landmark event for the UK, where we get people together talking about innovation, sharing learnings, but also starting to solve problems. We think if we can bring people together from a lot of different backgrounds, both professionally and personally, then the ideas that will come out of it will be much richer, and we can start having an informed and constructive debate about how we progress towards net zero as well. If you are interested in that, please have a look via the link that I'll supply in the slides. We're really excited about this, and it's the first year we wanted to kick off with a bang, and I think we'll have some really exciting talks, but also opportunities to participate in workshops, etc., whilst you're there. So before I finish, I just want to touch on the revisiting the giant leap together process. There's a famous saying that you can't cross a chasm in 2 small steps. We're looking at net zero as our chasm, and we need to take an iterative approach to getting across this chasm, but we need to work together to achieve it. And to do this, we've structured each of our annual cycles around this giant leap together operating model. That's where we define the challenges that we need to solve in the coming year over the first 3 months of the 12-year cycle. We then look at developing ideas, working with a whole host of people, not just the energy networks, but consultancies, engineering companies, consumer groups, the actual people who are going to be using these solutions. And then we move into the incubation phase. The incubation phase is where we've got a long list of good ideas, and we really start to develop them further by finding partnerships that are going to work together on the problem, really analysing what the regulatory or policy challenges might be before we move into acceleration, which is where project proposals are submitted, the best ones of those receive funding, and then we start to scale and support them through all the apparatus that I've already talked about. This is a really important process for us, and UKRI Innovate UK are working with Ofgem, but also the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy on this, because we do think that to achieve net zero, we need to work together and take this giant leap together. And that's all from me. So back to you, Rob.
Great, thanks, David. That's super interesting. We'll have time to address questions that are coming in for you largely at the end, but I wonder if there's one maybe they'll just pick out quickly, and that is, how did you decide on these most important challenges that you were going to focus on in SIF? Because they're quite different from a lot of the things that networks were doing with network innovation in the past. These are non-operational business as usual kind of challenges. These are things about the whole energy system that the networks can influence, but aren't all within their control either. So how did you get to that list of challenges?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Essentially, we started looking at what are the consensus areas within government policy and industry. So there is broadly, for instance, a consensus that we need to achieve a net zero electricity system by 2035 if we're going to reach our carbon budgets. And then we started to look below that as what are the challenges within it. For instance, we need to start rolling out 40 gigawatts of offshore wind within the 2030s, which is going to be a huge challenge. We've got targets for the number of heat pumps that need to be rolled out. And once we had that baseline view of all those aspects that generally there's consensus around what we have to achieve, we looked for where the gaps were. And we did that by talking to experts in the field, both academics, but also professionals, but also importantly involving consumer representative groups and policymakers as well. We brought all those people together, and then we started to be able to identify where there were gaps. So for instance, how do we maintain frequency in a system where we're not really using fossil fuel sources to provide those services? And that allowed us to define where we think the gaps are. But we will iterate these in coming years, and if anybody is interested in contributing to that process, there's always an open door, so do get in touch.
Great, thanks, David. Okay, so we'll address some of the more detailed questions later on after we've gone through the second presentation. So a slight change of gear, but while what you've heard from David is all about the networks, how we move energy around the system and how we want to do that to facilitate the best outcomes for consumers in the future in a net zero world. The networks, of course, are the whole system. One thing I think is really interesting about the network structure is the way that they're organized very effectively, in that you have a big national system feeding into local distribution networks at various different levels of voltage. And then, there's a network in each of our own homes and businesses in the wiring in our homes. And all of these things work together perfectly, effectively, to be able to turn our lights on when we press a switch. It's an amazing system. And part of that control of that system is because there's clear kind of accountability, there's clear boundaries set around each of those levels. Everybody understands what each of those bits of the system needs to do, certainly in today's world anyway. And the boundaries and the communication between those systems works in a way that is effective. I think when we look at the whole system, and what I'm going to come on to talk about the importance of local, that we don't necessarily have that same kind of clear accountability and control and the clear delivery at multi layers of the system across the whole energy system and its and all the services that it needs to provide in a net zero world. So I'm going to talk about the potential of smart local energy systems to be a way of delivering that multi-layer energy system that's needed in the future. The program that I run has been all about that, but let me start with this question of why local? So why is local important? Why do we need this multi-layered system? Well, I mean, we live and work and mostly we move around within our local areas. And the really interesting thing is that quite a lot of the decarbonisation we still have to do, heating, most of our efficiency is inherently tied to places, partly because of the buildings in these places, partly because of the different opportunities in different places. But as importantly, actually, we engage as people mostly in our local area. We care about where we live and where we work, and we want those places to be prosperous and to be non-polluted, and that we don't have to sit in traffic jams all the time. So our ability to change things is often a very local view of the world. But technically speaking, at the edge of the grid is where our supply meets our demand. This is where we use our energy, is at the edge of our grids. But not only where we use it, but where we use a variety of different things of electricity, heat, mobility services, our transport services. And in the future, those are going to be much more interlinked. Much more of it's going to be electrified, but the end services are going to be much more interlinked. And so if you're going to make sense of all of that and optimize across everything, then local is the place to do that, where supply and demand and heat and power and transport all meets up. You can't optimize in a different place than where it all meets. And lastly, the hard yards of decarbonisation of heat and transport, these are the two areas that have largely flatlined in terms of our emissions over the last decade. They vary place by place, you know, how you decarbonise buildings, the opportunities for doing low carbon heating, the way that you want to decarbonise mobility around a city or a town. These are very different in different places. So we're going to need to allow for local areas to do things in different ways to get to the best outcomes. This is, you know, being recognised more and more. Climate Change Committee acknowledged that a vast amount of the emissions are in the bailiwick of local areas, and that top-down policies can only go so far, and a far greater impact can be achieved through local knowledge and networks. And, you know, looking back to the Energy White Paper 2 years ago, an acknowledgement that electricity demand will be satisfied as much by local solutions as by a nationally organised and operated system. So there is, you know, good recognition or acknowledgement that local and national need to fit together much better. But I think a lot more work needs to be done to show how that can actually take effect and show the benefits of doing so. I guess we envisage a system that could look a lot more like this, where instead of a top-down supply through distribution to consumers in a kind of linear way, systems could be much better organised as supply and demand linked up around a place, providing services to the community in the middle of it and designed around the needs of that community and the people living there, so that the right opportunities can be taken in that place where there are resources or specific needs that need actioning particularly. And one of the key things to make that work is going to be a smart digital system that balances all of the networks, that balances the supply and demand and storage within that system, and delivers services in a way that the communities and the businesses in that place most want things delivered, and that optimize the efficiency and the cost of that system overall. This is all good theory, right? We've done some research recently trying to quantify what tailoring solutions for place might look like in terms of the benefits that it could provide to the people living in those places. And this slide shows the summary of that long piece of research, actually, which you can find at our website. It's called Accelerating Net Zero Delivery, and it has done some very detailed modelling to come up with these figures in 6 places around the UK. Aggregating those figures up to a kind of quasi-national figure, this modelling looked at what happens in the blue bars there if you take a place-specific approach, i.e. you design your system around the needs and the opportunities of that place, versus the orange bars, where you try and do the same thing across the whole country. So that this is a bit more like a centralised approach to decarbonising our places. And what you see there is really very striking figures, I would say, that we can cut the investment needed by about 1/3 by taking a place-specific approach. By tailoring our solutions for the needs and opportunities of place, we need to spend 3 times less upfront capital to decarbonise our places. Secondly, we generate double the direct energy savings. So this is savings in energy bills, in the infrastructure costs of putting in heating systems and electrified transport and that sort of stuff. So we spend less, we get double the direct savings. But the really big benefit on those bars down the bottom is that there's huge wider social benefits, hundreds and hundreds of billions of pounds of wider social benefits associated with tailoring solutions for the places we live in. These are lower pollution, they're better productivity, they are in health benefits, and a whole raft of other things that mean that these places just get better as places to live. This hits our levelling up agenda as a country, as well as just the pure energy benefits. So really strong quantification that doing things locally as part of our solution to net zero is going to get us to a better place in our journey. Our programme, Prospering from the Energy Revolution, has been running for a few years now. What we've been trying to do is that grey objective in the middle, prove how local energy business models can be investable and deliver some of those benefits that we've just seen. And we set ourselves some key criteria to run right through the programme. One was that there should be a whole system focus in local areas, looking at cross-power, heat and mobility, designed for local residents' needs and opportunities, and that these should be replicable and investable systems. It's translated into a set of activities in those blue circles around the outside there. Lots of projects, some very big demonstrators, some as a design pipelines for places around the country, some funding of technical components that to fill missing gaps in distributed energy systems. We largely think that most of the technology is there. It's about how you put it together intelligently to deliver for the local place. Data and digitalization is going to be a key part of that, of optimizing systems delivering for consumers in new and exciting ways. And then supporting all of that, we've got Energy Rev, which is a research consortium of researchers right across the country doing whole systems research, and a set of tools and capability delivered primarily by the Energy Systems Catapult to help deliver these things in the right way and in the best way. So it's a very complex program. We've got a fantastic array of projects across the country. So these dots show where our projects are happening. The black dots are our demonstrator projects that are looking to put a lot of kit on the ground in optimized ways, trying to generate new flexible services from better intelligence across the system. Our green dots are the detailed designs, which are a pipeline of future places ready to decarbonize in the best ways possible for that area. And there's a whole variety right across the UK, including one in Northern Ireland, you'll see. Also including a range of different kinds of places. So from really big conurbations like the West Midlands and Greater Manchester, right through to industrial communities of mixed economies of businesses, of heavy industry and residential, such as Milford Haven, the green dot that you can see right to the bottom left of Wales there. And indeed through to much more rural economies in some places with more spread out towns or smaller towns that's bordering on countryside. So again, one place does not fit all in this thing. We have to be able to accommodate different archetypes of system, different approaches, but be able to do this in a way that all adds up to a national picture of decarbonisation over the whole picture. Within the programme, we've got over 180 different organisations. And one of the things we learned very quickly was just the range of different organisations that need to work together to make this kind of local smart system happen. Local authorities, we know, are key to this. They have an interest in doing the best for their local place. So a whole range of local authorities taking various different roles in these projects, right from being the very firm lead of projects through to collaboration and helping with data and coordination. Various energy providers and network organisations, various energy service companies, data companies, lots of universities providing academic support, and lots of other businesses and organisations providing bits of the energy system, bits of technology, and various services that form part of these projects. I'm going to give you a brief example of just a couple of the projects that we're running. Later on, there'll be a link to a site where you can go and investigate all the projects within our portfolio. But let me first just talk about one of our demonstrators. This is Energy Superhub Oxford. You may have seen this in the news this week. Their Superhub was formally opened by the Transport Minister yesterday. And the picture on the left there is their transport Superhub, which is super fast charging. I think they have over 40 chargers at one of the big park and rides just outside Oxford. And this is the charging hub for the public to use as a very ready way of getting fast, super rapid charging for cars. But it's also linked into fleet service charging as well further down the line. So a total step change in kind of charging infrastructure. But that's only one part of the Superhub. The photo on the right is of the mega battery at Cowley substation. This is a world first hybrid battery that incorporates a large amount of lithium ion with a flow battery from Invinity Battery Systems. And the idea here is that this hybrid system can better react to balancing needs of the national grid by being able to cycle quickly the flow battery for small regular reactions to balancing needs, with the lithium component of that hybrid system being required to do less, and therefore extending the life of lithium batteries overall. It's all hooked into the national grid, and what that means is that the deep pool of power running through our national grid can be used to provide all the supercharging for EVs, but also the battery can connect into that market more easily. And we bypass the local grid's constraints in being able to provide that deep pool of charging capacity. The third element down the bottom is a heating system provided by Kensa, who are doing shared loop ground source heat pumps in the Cowley area for social housing primarily, and looking at how they can integrate flexible heat demand into a system like this, so that it's better able to react to constraints in the grid and be able to provide balancing services, but also for local consumers to be able to use their heating at times when it's cheaper to do so. And it's all held together by an AI system run by Habitat Energy, which is able to balance and optimize the position of these assets versus the market needs and the market opportunities in balancing mechanisms. So a real interesting cross-vector, cross-service smart system that's hooking into the national network for its greater capacity. One of our design projects is Greater Manchester's local energy market. So this is one of our biggest kind of geographic projects, looking right across the combined authority of 10 boroughs, really significant population. And it's looking at how do we plan for an area of that size and a population of that size? How can we put together detailed plans for each of those boroughs, and then integrate all of that with a local energy market system that enables the right trading and the right optimization of all of those assets within Greater Manchester and all of those supply and demand needs across all of those boroughs in the most optimal way. So these design projects are just coming up to the end of their projects at the moment. Really interesting findings coming out of them. We heard from Manchester the other day about tens of £1 million of savings on energy infrastructure from their local energy market per year. We heard about the opportunities for billions of pounds of investment as a result of all the planning in each of these boroughs for low carbon outcomes. And we heard about the opportunities for development of a local energy market with relatively small amounts of investment, to be honest, and rapid payback, as long as we can arrange the markets and the infrastructure in the right way to deliver against that. So we'll be publishing a lot more on all of these design projects as they finish, trying to understand the outcomes that are predicted from all of those. But we're certainly seeing really good early signs that the local smart systems are going to provide huge opportunities for places to decarbonise in the right way. So what we're doing is trying to prove what works. We're trying to get through the complexity of setting up these smart local energy systems by getting the right parties together to work on it. But it needs investment and collaboration, it needs innovation, and we need to be in it for the long term to work through all of these things. And as David was saying, we need to learn from these lessons and feed this back into policy and regulation so that those opportunities can be grasped. And last but not least, we need to see it can be done. Seeing is believing, and that's where we want to get to. But these benefits aren't easy to achieve. They are getting more and more tangible in our understanding of this, but they continue to need unblocking. So from a policy and regulation point of view, we're still existing in a very centralized world. There's not really a clear delivery plan of how we should go about decarbonising our places. Change is not at its most rapid right now. So what we're trying to do is make sure that all of the learning from this programme is getting fed back into BEIS and Ofgem as much as possible, and that the benefits from smart local approaches can really be understood in those organisations to facilitate change. On finance and investment, we need to join up this wall of finance that everybody talks about with the pipeline of projects. There is a wall of finance, there is a pipeline of projects, but at the moment they aren't meeting in the right way. They aren't talking the same language, they don't understand each other. So we need to continue to work across both of those communities to try and facilitate that exchange. We're working with the Green Finance Institute, the National Infrastructure Bank, and with organisations like the Core Cities Climate Investment Commission to try and do exactly that, to understand what needs to go in the middle between those two communities to facilitate that exchange of ideas so that both sides can work together. On capacity and capability, we're very aware that there is patchy capacity and indeed capability across the country, and that local authorities especially are not well funded to provide lots of people to work on this at the moment. So we are doing a lot of work to help set up tools and capability support in things like local area energy planning, which the Energy Systems Catapult published guidance on last week, and in Net Zero Go, which is a toolkit for local authorities, which the Catapult have developed with our funding, which is a step-by-step guide for local authorities on how to go about developing their net zero system for their area. So these tools are there to try and build capability alongside things like BEIS's local net zero hubs in helping us to actually deliver things on the ground over the coming years. And lastly, digitalization is going to be a key enabler of the optimization of our energy systems in the coming decade. And data access and getting the digital architecture right is really needed badly. The Energy Digitalisation Task Force report did a really good job on this last year, which I'd encourage you to read if you haven't read it already. And we're keen to continue to accelerate that with BEIS and Ofgem to really try and get things moving and make the most of the opportunities of a more digital energy economy in the future. So pulling all of that together, the research that I started with suggests that a national to local framework would really ease the barriers to delivering net zero. That we need 4 pillars within this framework: a clarity on governance of what happens at what different level, who's responsible for delivering what at what level of the system, from national right down to local. How do we join all of that up in the right portfolio of projects? How do we manage that portfolio in a way that local smart systems can be aggregated up into a national picture where we can optimize the networks and optimize the national supply in a way that we minimize how much extra work we have to do, and we maximize the benefit that consumers see from it all. We need to continue to build capacity and skills right across that system and support all the bodies involved in delivering net zero in the right way. And we need to join up funding and financing with all of this activity in a way that's productive for the future. So I think this is a really good model for how we can join this up to deliver net zero and its benefits. Last but not least, you can find out more about all of these projects. They're all online on our website at UKRI. If you just search for Prospering from the Energy Revolution, you will find it. So please do engage, find out more about the demonstrators or projects in your local area. And indeed, think about how will where you live become an energy smart place as part of our journey to net zero. Great, thank you. That's all I wanted to say on PFA.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I really love the Energy Super Hub Oxford because it, in quite a simple way, shows how a project brings together different people with very specific specializations, people who are great at building batteries, people who can do artificial intelligence systems, and also working with the national grid. So a big theme of what we've been talking about is about people working together, but I also think that competition and specialism exists within that as well. And it's just making sure that we get the best people within each of those specialisms to bring something to the party.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. I think that, you know, competition is going to be a driving force as ever in getting the best out of our energy system in future. And there's this constant tension of, you know, how much should government intervene in competition to get to net zero in the best way possible. And so that's an ongoing journey, I guess, isn't it? And I think how I see things is that we do need to set out some level of framework to just clarify roles and responsibilities. But if we can do that in the right way, then we can release competition. We can increase competition rather than reduce it. So this is not about restricting who does what, but it's about just clarifying where the action needs to take place and how that multi-level system stacks up as a whole thing.
It's funny you mentioned that, in fact, because one of our questions is, what is the optimal scale of a place or local to realise the benefits that have been shown? And actually, the two examples that you gave are on quite different scales, aren't they? One at a combined authority level and the other on quite a site specific. So could you give us an answer to that?
Yeah. It is a really good question. Pretty much every time I present something like this, somebody says, what does place mean? I think, you know, it's the obvious question. It's a really good question. I guess one thing to say about the Oxford project is that project is also a big part of Oxford as a city's plan. And, you know, we have another demonstrator in Oxfordshire, which is looking at what we do with the local network as well, and trying to really demonstrate the DSO, the distribution service operator model of what local networks do for the future. So putting intelligence into the local network and then trying to run competitive market services off that in an intelligent way that enables more supply and demand to get delivered off the same number of wires, if you like. So Energy Superb Oxford is one part of Oxford's plan, but there's various other things going on around that city as well. I think that there is a sweet spot that is probably at the larger end of local than the smaller. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing things at a kind of small local authority level. We probably should, but I think there's an aggregation and probably a kind of planning level that sits at something like combined authority or county council maybe level, because it provides a scale that can be resourced more easily, I think, rather than trying to do hundreds and hundreds of these things, of these local area energy plans. And it also enables aggregation at a level that's perhaps more easy to deal with from a national perspective. And lastly, I think there's a financing question here as well. This wall of money that I was talking about that everybody in the finance world refers to tends to be quite big amounts of infrastructure funds or project investment funds. So this isn't a couple of million to invest in a company. It's kind of 50 to 100 million to invest in, a significant net zero project in a place. And that sort of amount, I think, gets dealt with more easily or gets aggregated up more easily at that larger level of place. So that's my gut feel that that's a more sensible place level to be working at. But we have a variety of things going on still, so we'll continue to try and learn from that.
It's really interesting, and actually in itself is quite a valuable learning out of the whole program for how we approach some of these local energy proposals.
Yeah.
If we'll have a look at a few more of the Q&As in the chat now as well. So we've got one from Steve saying the Silicon Valley UK has a great ambition to attract the best talent into the energy transition. Is the tertiary education system in the UK robust enough to deliver the STEM graduates at the right time for the just energy transition? So I'm quite glad that you used the term tertiary education system there, Steve, actually, because I think it is wider than just universities and STEM degrees. We know that there's going to be a huge challenge in delivering the installation and rollout of a lot of the technologies we're trying to support. That's absolutely critical. I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see a pretty drastic reconstruction of our installation engineer workforce to be able to deliver heat pumps, charging points, and the rest of it. But also, we're in competition with other sectors for a lot of the skills we're looking for, and we've particularly seen this through the delivery of the digitalization task force and other work, is how do we attract people with the tech skills that are needed for some of these balancing of supply and demand problems and connecting millions of connected devices. And it is challenging, to be completely honest. I think there needs to be a bit of a scale up to be able to get those skills into the energy sector. But what I would say, and I do frequently for anyone thinking of getting involved, is it's a fascinating place to work. I decided about 8 years ago to work on energy, and that was driven largely because I wanted to be involved in climate change. But beyond that, it's just such a fascinating area where there's something for everyone, whether you're a social scientist, an engineer, someone who works in finance. All these skills are required to meet net zero. And actually, it's one of the greatest problems which humanity will ever solve, ultimately. And there's something very kind of personally satisfying in being involved in that as well.
Yeah, indeed, I couldn't agree more. And I think we are seeing new courses emerging that are looking at this sort of more whole systems approach in terms of master's courses. I think our system is capable of delivering the skills and capability needed. I think it needs a boost, probably, and I think there's a time lag, isn't there, between starting to run some of these courses and then actually getting the skills and experience in the market. So we need to get to be able to deliver that stuff for our future. And yeah, we all need to just sell as David was saying, sell the opportunity of working in this sector. It's certainly never boring. There's an interesting question here, David, which kind of gets at to both of our presentations, actually. Are the potential conflicts or synergies between the SIF's work at regional and national network level and local integrated energy system and agenda? How do they relate to each other? And it is that is a really interesting one. Clearly, networks are the foundation of all of our energy services. So they relate directly and very importantly. Clearly we're trying to make these programs join up as much as possible. And many of the challenges that David talked about that the SIF is focusing on are whole system challenges that help to deliver locally integrated systems. But I think there is also a remaining challenge that the incentives of the network companies aren't necessarily perfectly aligned with what local areas want to do. How do you see that, David, from your perspective?
I think there's a very important interaction there, but part of the reason that we've structured the SIF through this discovery alpha beta phase in is the solution doesn't necessarily have to be a national level energy network solution. The discovery phase is about understanding the problem and then thinking about what are the full range of solutions to solve that. So for instance, if there's some complicated mechanism of building scale hydrogen storage to alleviate constraints in the electricity system in an area, or we could just get more people cycling and walking at certain times, then those things should be weighed up and have a look at which is the most cost-effective way to bring benefits. And so that is what we're trying to do. There are, that's kind of a simplification of the problem, but actually in the UK, we've got quite a richness of energy markets at the moment from our network perspectives. And that's part of the reason that we think the UK is one of the best places to trial technologies. And we need to work out how those interact at both the national and local level. And I think that's one of the big challenges for the future system operator, which is now being mandated as something the government is thinking about setting up. But also what services should be provided by a distribution network, a local authority, transmission operator. Those kinds of questions are things we're looking at.
Yeah, exactly. One of the areas that I guess springs to mind that we've run into is, who plans who kind of owns the plan for a network, for network development within a certain area. Do the networks hold the pen on what infrastructure gets invested in? Well, they do, but should that be subservient to a local area's, to a city's energy plan? Should it be done alongside it? Should it be done independently of, but taking advice from? So, what's that interrelationship between local area energy planning and delivery and what the networks actually develop in terms of their infrastructure and their capability? And it's been interesting seeing Ofgem's call for input on governance of the local system, which closed recently, but which is kind of the first part of an ongoing piece of work, I think, in Ofgem to try and understand this, of how do we see local networks actually getting delivered? How do we see their upgrades and their development being delivered, and who controls that, and how does it interact with local authorities' plans for their areas? It's a really complicated place because, of course, local authorities' boundaries don't necessarily coincide with the way local network geography sits. So it's a complex picture that we do need to get a handle on, of how these things combine to create the right synergy and optimize the investment in all of the technology going into things.
We've got another one for you here, Rob. We've probably got time for another couple.
Yeah.
From Camilla, if I remember from your map, there are no major energy players involved in the energy projects in Cambridge, Norfolk and Suffolk area. University of Cambridge or any other Southeast university were not listed as an academic institution involved. Is there a reason for it? Is it a lack of willingness to take part and participate at a larger scale, a lack of awareness, or other? And I suppose not just from a Cambridge perspective, but if we tweak the question to how do we ensure that these capabilities are being built across the entire of the UK and not being focused in certain areas?
Yeah, really good question. Yeah, the nearest projects to the sort of East Anglia regions there's one in Peterborough. One of our design projects is in Peterborough, which is looking at kind of smart heat networks across the Peterborough area. And there's also one in Southend down, which I agree is not not quite Suffolk, is it? Essex, I think. But looking at, again, a smart system for Southend. We ran all of these as open competitions. We don't normally talk about kind of who took part in those competitions, but obviously the funding got awarded to the projects with which proposed the best solutions to the challenge that we set out there. What I would say is that we do a lot of things trying to work into local authorities right across the country. So this is by no means sort of just going on in the dots on that map. The Net Zero Go tool that I spoke about, that the Catapult have been involved in, they've been talking to hundreds, literally, local authorities all over the country about that tool, about how we help local authorities at various different stages of their journey, of their development, of their net zero strategies, and how tools like that can help them. And indeed, there are a number of projects that have just been at the wrong phase for our development. Bristol is often seen as a leader in this area. We funded Bristol in one of the very early feasibility studies, but haven't given them a lot of money. They've been on their own kind of journey with this, and that's just that's right for them. So there's no particular meaning in who's got funding and who hasn't, other than what suited those areas to apply for at the time, and the quality of applications.
Great, thanks, Rob. Another quick one from an anonymous attendee. Does the data science area cover the impact of electricity non-commodity charges on the cost potential of projects for reducing consumption and carbon emissions? Which I presume is for me. And
it certainly came up during your talk. Yeah.
This one, it comes back to the points that I was making, that we're really focused on outcomes of the challenges we're setting, and where the benefits are realized within the energy system. It is a little bit of a moot point. We want to find the best solution to deliver benefits for the end consumers. If that means that we'll be able to integrate more renewable generation, and therefore the commodity charges on the energy bill reduce because they are the lowest forms of electricity generation at the moment, great. But if it's also a benefit that can be realized through other parts of the energy bill, for instance, through just general demand reduction, rather than something that sits with the energy networks, then we'll try and achieve that as well. And the data science area, we're not there yet, to be completely honest, but those are the sorts of insights that we would like to be able to extract from the projects and actually make counterfactual comparisons between different approaches, so that we can see which is achieving the best results as well from a whole system perspective.
Very good. I think we're probably at the end of our time slot for this webinar. It's been a really good session and some great questions. Interesting discussion, David. We should talk about all this stuff more, shouldn't we?
Yeah, definitely.
Very good.
Well, thanks a lot, Rob. I hope everybody found it interesting. And as we've said, if you've got any follow-up questions or want to learn more about the programs, there's an open door always.
Indeed. Good stuff. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye.